The words still echo in my mind 6 months later, cutting deeper than any physical pain I endured during my recovery. Mom, you're completely useless now. What good are you to anyone? My own daughter Jessica spoke those words while I sat in my wheelchair, still learning to walk again after my stroke. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She had no idea that just 3 weeks before my medical emergency, I had quietly purchased the $450,000 house in Grandview Heights that she'd been desperately trying to buy for her family. The same house she'd begged me to co-sign for. The same house she claimed would finally give her children the life they deserved. What Jessica didn't know was that her worthless mother had just become one of the wealthiest women in Riverside, Ohio, thanks to my late sister's bakery empire. And as I watched her pace around my hospital room, complaining about how my stroke had ruined her plans, I realized something that would change everything between us forever. My name is Linda Harper, and for 32 years, I believed I was living the dream of motherhood. I had poured every ounce of my being into raising Jessica after her father walked out when she was barely 3 years old. Working double shifts at the Riverside Community Hospital as a nurse's aide, taking on weekend cleaning jobs, selling homemade crafts at local fairs. Whatever it took to ensure my daughter had everything she needed and most of what she wanted. Jessica grew up in our small 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, where the wallpaper peeled in the corners and the heating system groaned through winter nights. But despite our modest circumstances, I made sure she never felt deprived. Piano lessons when she showed interest in music, summer camps when her friends were going, name-brand clothes when she insisted they mattered for fitting in at school. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw her smile, when she hugged me tight, and whispered, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." She excelled academically, earning a scholarship to Ohio State University where she studied business administration. I remember the pride swelling in my chest at her graduation ceremony, tears streaming down my face as she walked across that stage. My baby girl had made it. All those years of stretching every dollar, of eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could have proper meals, of wearing the same winter coat for 5 years so she could have fashionable clothes, it had all led to this moment. After college, Jessica landed a position at a marketing firm in downtown Riverside. She met Brandon Harper, a solid young man who worked in insurance, and they married in a beautiful ceremony that cost me 3 months' salary. I didn't mind. Seeing Jessica in that white dress, radiant with happiness, made every financial stress worthwhile. When they asked me to help with the down payment on their first apartment, I liquidated my small savings account without hesitation. The grandchildren came next. Tyler, now 8, and Sophie, 6. Beautiful, energetic children who called me Grandma Linda and filled my modest home with laughter during their visits. I spoiled them shamelessly, taking them to movies, buying toys I couldn't afford, creating magical birthday parties in my tiny backyard. Jessica often commented on how generous I was, how lucky the kids were to have such a devoted grandmother. As the years passed, Jessica and Brandon's ambitions grew. They wanted a bigger apartment, then a starter home, then something more prestigious. Each move required financial assistance that I provided gladly, sometimes taking loans against my retirement savings or picking up extra shifts to make ends meet. My own needs became secondary. Repairs to my aging house were postponed. My car ran long past its prime. My wardrobe consisted of thrift store finds and hand-me-downs from colleagues. But I felt rich in the ways that mattered. My daughter was successful, married to a good man, raising my grandchildren in comfort. She called me regularly, included me in family dinners, sought my advice on everything from career decisions to parenting challenges. We had what I believed was a close, loving relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The catalyst for everything that followed came on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. Jessica called, her voice tight with excitement and anxiety. "Mom, we found it. The house. The one we've been dreaming about. She described a 4-bedroom colonial in Grandview Heights, the most desirable neighborhood in Riverside. Large bedrooms for the kids, a modern kitchen, a backyard perfect for entertaining, a 3-car garage, and best of all, it was in the district with the top-rated elementary school. "It's $450,000, she continued breathlessly, "and the market is so competitive right now. We need to make an offer immediately, but Brandon's credit score isn't quite high enough for the loan amount we need. Would you consider co-signing? I know it's a big ask, but this house would change everything for Tyler and Sophie. They deserve to grow up somewhere special, somewhere they can be proud to bring friends home." My heart ached with the familiar desire to give my daughter everything she wanted. But reality crashed down hard. On my nurse's aide salary, co-signing a $450,000 mortgage was impossible. The bank would never approve me, and even if they did, I couldn't risk my modest retirement savings on such a massive obligation. "Jessica, honey, I wish I could help. But that's beyond my financial capability," I explained gently. "Maybe you could look at something a bit less expensive, or wait until Brandon's credit improves?" The disappointment in her voice was palpable. "Mom, we can't wait. Interest rates are rising, and houses in good neighborhoods are being snapped up immediately. This is our chance to give the kids the life they deserve." She paused, and I could hear the accusation forming. "You've always found ways to help. Before. I thought family came first with you." That conversation haunted me for days. The guilt gnawed at my insides, the familiar feeling that I was somehow failing my daughter when she needed me most. I had always been her safety net, her reliable source of support. Now, when she was asking for the biggest favor of all, I had to say no. But fate had other plans. 3 days after Jessica's call, I received a phone call that would alter the trajectory of my entire life. The voice on the other end belonged to Robert Stevens, an attorney from Columbus I'd never met. "Mrs. Harper, I'm calling regarding your sister Margaret Davis's estate. I apologize for the delay in contacting you. It took some time to locate your current information." My sister Margaret. We'd lost touch years ago after a family disagreement that seemed important at the time, but now felt petty and meaningless. She'd moved to Columbus, started a small bakery, and built what I understood to be a modest but successful business. We exchanged Christmas cards sporadically, but our relationship never recovered from the rift that had driven us apart. "I'm afraid I have sad news," Mr. Stevens continued. "Margaret passed away 6 weeks ago from complications related to cancer. However, I also have some surprising information regarding her will. Margaret had never married, never had children. Her bakery business had grown into a small chain of 6 locations throughout central Ohio, plus several profitable real estate investments. With no immediate family except me, she had left everything to her only sister, me. The numbers Mr. Stevens quoted seemed impossible. After taxes and estate fees, I would inherit approximately $2. $3 million in cash, plus properties worth another $800,000. My sister, the woman I'd barely spoken to in 15 years, had made me a multimillionaire. "There's one condition," Mr. Stevens explained. "Margaret left a letter specifically for you, and she requested that you read it before making any major decisions about the inheritance." The letter arrived by courier the next day. Margaret's familiar handwriting, barely changed from our childhood, covered 3 pages of cream-colored stationery. "Dear Linda," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably shocked to learn about my financial situation. The truth is, I never forgot how generous you were when we were young, how you always shared everything you had even when you had very little. I also never forgot how you sacrificed for Jessica, even when it meant going without yourself. I've been watching from a distance, Linda. I know about Jessica's graduation, her wedding, the grandchildren. I know you've given her everything, just like you gave me everything when we were kids sharing that tiny bedroom in our parents' house. I also know that you're probably still giving, still sacrificing, still putting everyone else's needs before your own. This money represents my life's work, but it also represents my regret that we let pride and stubbornness keep us apart. I can't undo the lost years, but I can give you the freedom to finally live for yourself. Please don't waste this gift on more sacrifices for people who should be taking care of themselves by now. You've earned the right to enjoy your golden years. With love and hope for your happiness, Margaret. I read the letter 3 times before the reality sank in. My estranged sister had not only forgiven our old quarrel, but had been silently watching over me, understanding my character in ways I hadn't understood myself. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was Margaret's final act of sisterly love, her way of ensuring I could stop sacrificing and start living. The first thing I did was call Jessica to share the incredible news. Surely she would be thrilled. That her mother's financial worries were over, that I could now help with the house and anything else the family needed. "Mom, that's amazing," she exclaimed when I explained about Margaret's inheritance. "I can't believe Aunt Margaret had that much money. This changes everything. You can co-sign for the house now, and maybe even help with the down payment. Brandon and I were just talking about how we really need to move quickly before someone else makes an offer." Something in her immediate pivot to how the inheritance could benefit her gave me pause. No questions about how I was processing this windfall. No concerns about my emotional state regarding Margaret's death. No suggestions that I might want to use this money for my own needs. Just an immediate assumption that this stroke of fortune would flow toward her family's desires. "Jessica, I'm still processing all of this," I said carefully. "It's a lot to take in. Maybe we should talk about it when you come visit this weekend?" "Of course, Mom, but you will consider helping with the house, right? This inheritance is like a gift from the universe, perfect timing for what we need." After hanging up, I sat in my quiet living room, Margaret's letter still clutched in. My hands. My sister's words echoed in my mind. Please don't waste this gift on more sacrifices for people who should be taking care of themselves by now. Over the next week, I found myself thinking differently about Jessica's request. At 35, she and Brandon both had good jobs and steady incomes. They'd been living comfortably in their current home for 5 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The move to Grandview Heights wasn't about necessity. It was about status, about keeping up with their more affluent friends, about providing their children with luxuries rather than genuine needs. Meanwhile, I continued living in my deteriorating house on Maple Street, driving my unreliable car, wearing clothes that had seen better years. When was the last time I'd bought something purely for my own enjoyment? When had I last taken a vacation, pursued a hobby, or invested in my own comfort and happiness? The more I reflected, the more I realized that Margaret's inheritance represented something more valuable than money. It was an opportunity to break the cycle of constant self-sacrifice that had defined my adult life. For the first time ever, I had the means to make choices based on my own desires rather than someone else's needs. That's when I made a decision that would ultimately expose the true nature of my relationship with Jessica, though I didn't realize it at the time. Instead of co-signing for her mortgage or providing financial assistance, I decided to purchase the Grandview Heights house myself. Not as a gift, not as an investment for Jessica's family, but as a property that I owned outright, that I could choose to offer to them under terms that felt fair and respectful. Working through Mr. Stevens, I made a cash offer on the house at full asking price. In a competitive market, cash talks, and the sellers accepted immediately. Jessica never knew that the mysterious buyer who had outbid them was her own mother. She called me that evening, devastated. "Mom, we lost the house. Someone came in with a cash offer that we couldn't match. Brandon is furious, and I just feel so defeated. We were so close to giving the kids the life they deserved." I comforted her, listening to her disappointment, feeling the familiar tug to fix her problems. But this time, I held back. This time, I had a different plan. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know how much you wanted that house, but maybe something even better will come along." What Jessica didn't know was that something better was already waiting for her, if she could show me the respect and appreciation that would make me want to share it. The house was mine now, and I intended to use it as a test of our relationship. Would my daughter value me for who I was, or only for what I could provide? The answer to that question would come sooner than I expected, in the most heartbreaking way possible. 2 weeks after purchasing the house, I was in my kitchen preparing breakfast when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the linoleum floor as a crushing sensation overwhelmed the left side of my body. I tried to call for help, but the words wouldn't form correctly. My left arm felt like it belonged to someone else, heavy and unresponsive. Somehow, I managed to dial 911 before collapsing onto the kitchen floor, surrounded by ceramic shards and spilled coffee, listening to my own distorted voice trying to explain to the dispatcher what was happening. The last thing I remember clearly was the sound of sirens getting closer, and the desperate hope that I would survive to see my daughter and grandchildren again. I had no way of knowing that this medical crisis would strip away all pretenses and reveal exactly what Jessica truly thought of her supposedly worthless mother. The woman who had just secretly purchased her dream house was about to discover that love, like everything else in their relationship, had always been conditional. I awakened in the intensive care unit at Riverside General Hospital 3 days. Later, my mind foggy and my body feeling foreign. The steady beeping of monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop to my confusion as I struggled to understand what had happened. My speech was slurred, my left side weak and uncooperative, and simple tasks like lifting my hand or turning my head required enormous effort. Dr. Patricia Wells, a neurologist with kind eyes and a gentle manner, explained that I had suffered a significant stroke affecting the right side of my brain. The damage had impacted my motor functions, speech, and cognitive processing, though she assured me that with intensive rehabilitation, many stroke survivors made remarkable recoveries. "You're fortunate, Mrs. Harper," she said during one of our early conversations. "The paramedics reached you quickly, and we were able to minimize the damage. Your recovery will take time and dedication, but I'm optimistic about your prognosis. You're stronger than you realize." Those words became my anchor during the difficult weeks that followed. Physical therapy sessions that left me exhausted and frustrated. Speech therapy that made me feel like a child learning to form basic words. Occupational therapy that turned simple activities like buttoning a shirt into monumental challenges. Every day brought small victories mixed with humbling reminders of how much I had lost. Jessica visited regularly during my hospital stay, but something felt different about her presence. She seemed agitated, checking her phone frequently, cutting conversations short when Brandon called about work or the children's activities. When I struggled to express myself clearly, she would finish my sentences with visible impatience, as if my slower pace of communication was an inconvenience rather than a natural part of my recovery. "Mom, you need to focus on getting better quickly," she told me during one visit, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "The kids are asking when Grandma Linda will be back to normal, and Brandon's been having to take time off work to help with pickups and drop-offs. We really need you to push harder in therapy." I tried to explain that recovery wasn't something I could simply will into happening faster, that my brain needed time to rewire itself and compensate for the damage. But Jessica seemed to interpret my explanation as making excuses. Her expression, growing more frustrated with each word I struggled to pronounce clearly. "Other people bounce back from strokes," she said, scrolling through her phone while I spoke. "Mrs. Patterson from down the street had one last year, and she was back to her normal routine within a month. Maybe you're not trying hard enough." Her words stung, but I attributed them to stress and worry. Jessica had never dealt with serious illness in our family before, and I convinced myself that her impatience came from fear and concern rather than genuine callousness. Surely, once I made more progress, once I could demonstrate that I was indeed working hard to recover, she would return to being the loving, supportive daughter I had always known. After 2 weeks in the hospital, I was transferred to Pine Valley Rehabilitation Center, a facility that specialized in helping stroke patients regain their independence. The change of scenery brought hope, and I threw myself into the intensive therapy schedule with determination. Small improvements came daily: clearer speech, steadier walking, better coordination with my left hand. The staff celebrated each milestone with me, understanding that every step forward represented enormous effort and courage. Jessica's visits became less frequent once I moved to Pine Valley. She claimed that the drive was inconvenient, that work was particularly demanding, that the children's school schedules made it difficult to find time. When she did come, her stays grew shorter and her demeanor more strained. She often brought Brandon along, and I noticed them exchanging meaningful glances when they thought I wasn't looking. During one particularly difficult conversation, Jessica brought up practical matters that I wasn't ready to face. "Mom, we need to talk about your house," she said, settling into the visitor's chair beside my bed. "You can't live alone anymore, not with your condition. Brandon and I have been discussing options." I tried to protest that my recovery was progressing well, that I would regain enough independence to return home eventually. But Jessica cut me off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Be realistic, Mom. You can barely walk without assistance. Your speech is still unclear, and you need help with basic tasks. Living alone isn't safe for someone in your condition." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be a list. "We've looked into several assisted living facilities. There's one called Sunset Manor that has availability and accepts Medicaid. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and they have medical staff on site." The casual way she discussed upending my entire life, the assumption that I would have no say in these decisions, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. "Jessica, I'm not ready to give up my independence. I want to try going home first, maybe with some in-home care assistance." Her response revealed the first crack in the facade of concern she'd been maintaining. "Mom, you're being stubborn and unrealistic. Home care is expensive, and frankly, you don't have the resources for that kind of ongoing expense. Sunset Manor is what makes sense financially." Something about her tone made me ask a question I'd never thought I'd need to pose to my own daughter. "Jessica, what do you think happened to the inheritance from Margaret?" She looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean? You said you inherited some money from Aunt Margaret, but you never mentioned how much or what you did with it. I assumed it wasn't very significant since you didn't offer to help with the house." The realization hit me like a physical blow. In all the chaos of my stroke and hospitalization, I had never actually told Jessica the full extent of Margaret's bequest. She had no idea that her supposedly destitute mother was actually quite wealthy, that my inability to help with their house purchase hadn't been about lacking resources, but about choosing not to enable their demands. I decided to test the waters, to see how Jessica would react to the truth about my financial situation. "The inheritance was substantial, Jessica. Enough that I don't need to worry about assisted living costs or home care expenses." Her entire demeanor changed instantly. She sat up straighter, her phone forgotten, her attention suddenly laser-focused on our conversation. "How substantial are we talking about, Mom? Like, enough to pay for a few months of care, or something more significant?" The hunger in her voice was unmistakable. Not relief that her mother wouldn't be a financial burden, not happiness that I could afford quality care, but immediate calculation about how this money might benefit her. "Substantial enough that I have options," I replied carefully. Over the next few days, Jessica's behavior shifted dramatically. She began visiting more frequently, bringing flowers and small gifts, staying longer and showing renewed interest in my therapy progress. She also started asking pointed questions about my finances, my legal arrangements, and my plans for the future. Mom, have you thought about what you want to do with Aunt Margaret's money? She asked during one visit, her tone carefully casual. I mean, you're going to need ongoing care, but if there's anything left over after your expenses, maybe you should consider helping the grandchildren. Tyler's going to need braces soon, and Sophie's showing real talent in gymnastics. Private. Coaching is expensive, but it could make such a difference in her development. I began to understand that Jessica's concern about my living situation wasn't primarily about my safety or well-being. It was about gaining access to and control over my financial resources. The daughter who had barely visited when she thought I was poor was now deeply invested in my care now that she suspected I might be wealthy. The breaking point came during a family meeting that Jessica arranged without consulting me. She arrived at Pine Valley with Brandon, both of them carrying folders and wearing serious expressions that suggested they'd been planning this conversation for some time. Mom, we need to discuss your future care in detail, Jessica began, pulling out a stack of papers. Brandon and I have been researching your options, and we think we've found the perfect solution. She proceeded to outline a plan that would have me declared incompetent to manage my own affairs, with her as my legal guardian and power of attorney. She had researched the process, contacted attorneys, and even begun preliminary paperwork. The inheritance from Margaret would be placed in a trust that she would manage, ostensibly for my care, but with provisions that would allow her to make decisions about expenditures. This way, you won't have to worry about financial decisions or managing your care, she explained, her voice taking on the patronizing tone one might use with a confused child. Brandon and I will handle everything, making sure you get the best possible care while ensuring that any remaining funds are preserved for the grandchildren's future. The audacity of her proposal left me speechless. Without my knowledge or consent, she had developed a comprehensive plan to take control of my life and my money, all while presenting it as being in my best interest. The woman who had been too busy to visit regularly when she thought I was poor was now ready to assume complete legal control over my affairs now that she knew I was wealthy. Jessica, I managed to say, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I haven't agreed to any of this. I'm recovering well, and I'm fully capable of making my own decisions about my care and my finances. Her mask of concern finally slipped completely. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. The stroke has affected your judgment, and you're not capable of managing this kind of money responsibly. Look at how you've lived your whole life, in that tiny house, driving that old car, never spending money on yourself. You obviously don't understand how to handle wealth. The irony was staggering. She was criticizing me for the very sacrifices I had made to provide for her, using my history of selflessness as evidence that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. The daughter who had benefited from every one of those sacrifices was now using them as justification for taking away my autonomy. Besides, she continued, her voice growing harder, what do you really need the money for at your age and in your condition? You should be thinking about your legacy, about what you can do for your grandchildren's future. Isn't that more important than your personal comfort? Brandon nodded along, adding his own observations about my supposed cognitive decline and the complexity of managing investments. Together, they painted a picture of a confused elderly woman who needed protection from her own poor judgment, conveniently overlooking the fact that I had successfully managed my finances for decades and was showing steady improvement in all areas of my recovery. When I firmly refused to sign any of the documents they had brought, Jessica's frustration exploded into anger. Mom, you're being incredibly selfish. After everything we've done for you, after all the time and effort we've put into researching your care options, you won't even consider what's best for the family. What's best for the family? I repeated slowly. Or what's best for you and Brandon? Her face flushed red. How can you say that? We're trying to help you to make sure you're taken care of properly. If you won't accept help, if you insist on being stubborn and difficult, then maybe you deserve whatever happens to you. The venom in her voice was like nothing I had ever heard from her before. This wasn't the concerned daughter I had raised, the woman who had once called me her best friend and closest confidant. This was someone I barely recognized, someone whose primary concern was accessing my money rather than supporting my recovery. "Jessica," I said quietly, "I think you should leave now. I need some time to think about what you've said." She stood up abruptly, gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. "Fine. But don't come crying to us when you realize you can't manage on your own. Don't expect us to keep dropping everything to help you when you won't even consider reasonable solutions to your problems." As she turned to leave, she delivered the words that would haunt me for months to come. "Mom, you're completely useless now. What good are you to anyone? You can't take care of yourself. You can't help with the grandchildren. You can't even have a normal conversation without struggling to get the words out. All you're doing is taking up space and resources that could be better used elsewhere." She paused at the door, her final words cutting deeper than any physical pain I had endured. "At least when you were healthy, you were useful. You could babysit. You could help with things around the house. You could contribute something to the family. Now, you're just a burden that everyone has to work around. Maybe it would be better for everyone if you just accepted that your useful life is over." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that my daughter viewed me not as a person deserving of love and respect, but as a resource to be managed or discarded based on my utility to her family, the woman I had sacrificed everything for. The child I had raised with unconditional love saw me as worthless now that I needed care instead of providing it. But what Jessica didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that her worthless mother owned the very house she had been dreaming about for months. The same house she had begged me to help her buy. The same house that represented everything she wanted for her family's future was sitting empty in Grandview Heights with my name on the deed. As I lay in my hospital bed that night, processing the cruelty of Jessica's words and the calculated nature of her guardianship proposal, I began to understand that Margaret's inheritance had given me more than financial security. It had given me the power to choose who deserved my generosity and who had revealed themselves to be unworthy of it. The worthless mother was about to teach her ungrateful daughter a lesson about respect that she would never forget. But first, I had to get strong enough to deliver it. The days following Jessica's cruel outburst passed in a strange mixture of heartbreak and clarity. While part of me grieved for the daughter I thought I knew, another part felt an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time in decades, I was free from the burden of trying to please someone who clearly didn't value me as a person. The fog of confusion that had surrounded our relationship finally lifted, revealing the harsh truth about what I had really meant to Jessica all along. My recovery accelerated dramatically once I stopped expending emotional energy on her visits and demands. Without the constant stress of trying to meet her expectations or decode her passive-aggressive comments, I could focus entirely on regaining my strength and independence. Dr. Wells noticed the change immediately. "Mrs. Harper, your progress this week has been remarkable," she said during one of our sessions. "Your speech clarity has improved significantly, your motor control is much steadier, and your cognitive assessments are showing excellent results. Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up." What I was doing differently was simple. I was finally living for myself instead of for Jessica's approval. The physical therapists commented on my increased determination, the speech therapists praised my consistent effort, and the occupational therapists marveled at how quickly I was mastering daily living skills that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. More importantly, I began to think clearly about my future for the first time since the stroke. Margaret's inheritance sat waiting in my accounts, and I had decisions to make about how to use this unexpected gift. Jessica's behavior had shown me exactly what would happen if I continued to be the self-sacrificing mother I had always been. She would drain every penny from me while convincing herself that she deserved it, that my money was somehow rightfully hers simply because she was my daughter. But I had another option now, one that Margaret's wisdom had made possible. I could choose to live with dignity, to surround myself with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. The house in Grandview Heights represented more than just real estate. It was my ticket to a new life, my chance to start fresh on my own terms. 3 weeks after Jessica's hospital room tirade, I called Robert Stevens from my rehabilitation center room. "Mr. Stevens, I need to discuss some arrangements regarding the property I purchased in Grandview Heights. I think it's time to put the house to use." "Of course, Mrs. Harper. I've been monitoring the property as you requested. The maintenance company has kept everything in perfect condition. What did you have in mind?" "I want to move in as soon as I'm discharged from rehabilitation. Can you arrange for the necessary modifications to make it accessible for someone recovering from a stroke? Grab bars in the bathrooms, a ramp for the front steps, whatever might be needed to ensure my safety?" There was a pause, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. "That's certainly possible. The house is already quite suitable for accessibility modifications given its single-story design and wide hallways. I can have contractors begin work immediately. But Mrs. Harper, are you certain about this decision? It's a significant change from your previous living situation." I looked around the sterile rehabilitation center room, then out the window toward the parking lot where Jessica's car had once sat during her visits. "Mr. Stevens, I've never been more certain about anything in my life. I want to live somewhere beautiful, somewhere I can enjoy the fruits of my sister's generosity and my own hard work. I've spent enough years making do with less than I deserved." The contractors worked quickly and efficiently, and Robert kept me updated on every modification. Bathroom safety bars, a gentle ramp leading to the front entrance, a state-of-the-art security system, and even some furniture selected by an interior designer who specialized in creating comfortable, accessible living spaces. By the time I was ready for discharge, the house would be a perfect sanctuary for my new independent life. Meanwhile, I began building relationships with people who saw value in me beyond my usefulness. Carol Newman, a woman in her early 60s who was recovering from hip replacement surgery, became my closest friend at Pine Valley. Unlike Jessica, Carol was genuinely interested in my thoughts, my experiences, and my plans for the future. She listened without judgment when I shared the painful truth about my daughter's behavior, offering insights from her own experience with adult children. "Linda, honey, some people never learn to see their parents as anything more than resources," she said one afternoon as we worked together in the rehabilitation center's garden. "My son went through a phase like that in his 30s, always calling when he needed money or help, never just to check on how I was doing. The difference was, I set boundaries early. I told him that our relationship needed to be mutual, that I wouldn't be treated like a bank with legs." "How did he respond to that?" I asked, genuinely curious about how such confrontations typically played out. Carol smiled, her hands gentle as she tended to the tomato plants we were helping to maintain. "He was angry at first, accused me of being selfish and unloving. But eventually he realized that I wasn't going anywhere, that I still loved him, but that I expected to be treated with basic respect. It took about a year, but our relationship is stronger now than it ever was before. Sometimes tough love is the only kind that works." Her words gave me hope that perhaps Jessica and I might eventually find our way to a healthier dynamic. But they also reinforced my conviction that I needed to maintain firm boundaries, that returning to our old pattern of my constant giving and her constant taking would solve nothing. Dr. Wells arranged for me to have a series of meetings with Margaret Davis, a social worker who specialized in helping stroke survivors transition back to independent living. Margaret shared my sister's name, which felt like a sign that I was making the right choices. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm confidence that comes from years of helping people navigate difficult life transitions. "Mrs. Harper, your recovery has been exceptional. Margaret told me during our first meeting. Most patients your age take months longer to achieve the level of independence you've regained. You should be proud of how hard you've worked. Thank you. I've had good motivation to get better quickly. She consulted her notes, then looked at me with keen interest. I understand you're planning to live independently in a new home rather than with family or in an assisted living facility. That's a bold choice. What's driving that decision? For the first time, I shared the full story of Jessica's behavior with someone in an official capacity. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more concerned as I described the guardianship, papers, and Jessica's cruel words about my worthlessness. Mrs. Harper, what you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse, or at least attempted financial elder abuse. Your daughter's behavior is concerning from both a personal and a legal standpoint. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but serious. Have you considered reporting this to Adult Protective Services? They have resources to help seniors who are being exploited by family members. The suggestion caught me off guard. I had been so focused on my own emotional response to Jessica's behavior that I hadn't considered it might constitute actual abuse under the law. I hadn't thought about involving authorities. Jessica is still my daughter, and I don't want to destroy our relationship completely. Margaret nodded understandingly. I hear that concern from many clients. Family relationships are complicated, and nobody wants to be the one to escalate a conflict. But Mrs. Harper, your daughter has already escalated this conflict by attempting to have you declared incompetent and by verbally abusing you during your recovery. You have every right to protect yourself. She handed me several brochures and information sheets. I'm not saying you have to take legal action, but I want you to know your options. In the meantime, I strongly recommend that you work with an attorney to establish clear legal protections for your assets and your autonomy. Someone who attempted to gain guardianship once might very well try again. That conversation prompted me to schedule another meeting with Robert Stevens, this time focusing on protecting myself from future attempts at financial exploitation. We established an irrevocable trust that would preserve the majority of my assets while providing me with a generous monthly income. More importantly, we created legal documentation that clearly established my mental competency and my explicit wishes regarding my care and my finances. Mrs. Harper, these documents will make it extremely difficult for anyone to challenge your capacity or gain unwanted control over your affairs, Robert explained as I signed each paper. You're taking smart steps to protect your independence. Mr. Stevens, there's something else I want to discuss. I own a house that someone very much wants to live in. I'm considering offering it to them, but with very specific conditions attached. Is it possible to create a lease agreement that could be revoked if certain terms aren't met? His eyebrows raised slightly, but his professional demeanor never wavered. Certainly. What kind of conditions are you thinking about? I outlined my idea carefully. The house in Grandview Heights could be offered to Jessica and her family, but not as a gift and not as a traditional rental. Instead, it would be a performance-based arrangement where their continued residence would depend on treating me with respect and including me meaningfully in their lives. Specific requirements about regular visits, family involvement, and basics courtesy would be written into the lease agreement. Violation of these terms would result in immediate eviction. It's an unusual arrangement, Robert admitted, but it's entirely legal. You're essentially creating a lease with behavioral clauses, which is perfectly acceptable given that you own the property outright. It would give you significant leverage in the relationship while providing them with something they clearly want. The question is whether I should offer this arrangement now or wait until they come to me. Jessica still doesn't know that I own the house she's been dreaming about. Robert considered this thoughtfully. Mrs. Harper, in my experience, people value most what they have to work for. If you simply offer the house now, your daughter might see it as another instance of your usual generosity. But if she has to acknowledge her mistakes and work to rebuild your relationship first, She might develop genuine appreciation for both the gift and for you. His advice resonated with something Margaret had written in her letter about not wasting. The inheritance on more sacrifices for people who should be taking care of themselves. Jessica needed to demonstrate that she could value me as a person before I considered sharing any of my newfound resources with her. The day of my discharge from Pine Valley arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Carol Newman had been released the week before, and she planned to visit me in my new home once I was settled. Dr. Wells came by for a final assessment, pronouncing my recovery nothing short of remarkable. "Mrs. Harper, you've regained approximately 90% of your pre-stroke capabilities. Your speech is clear, your mobility is excellent, and your cognitive function shows no deficits whatsoever. You should feel very proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, Dr. Wells. You and your team gave me the tools I needed, but I had the motivation to use them." She smiled warmly. "The best recoveries always happen when patients have something meaningful to work toward. It sounds like you have exciting plans for this new chapter of your life." The transportation service arrived precisely on time, and I settled into the comfortable sedan for the drive to Grandview Heights. As we turned into the upscale neighborhood, with its tree-lined streets and carefully maintained properties, I felt a surge of anticipation mixed with a sense of rightness. This was where I belonged now, not in the tiny house on Maple Street where I had spent decades making do with less than I deserved. The house looked even more beautiful than I remembered from the day I had secretly toured it with the real estate agent. The modifications were barely noticeable. The ramp blended seamlessly with the front landscaping, and the grab bars had been chosen in finishes that complemented the existing fixtures. Inside, the interior designer had created a space that was both elegant and comfortable, with furniture arranged to maximize accessibility without sacrificing style. Standing in the spacious living room with its vaulted ceilings and large windows, overlooking the professionally landscaped backyard, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just a house, it was proof that I had value, that I deserved beauty and comfort, that my years of sacrifice had earned me the right to enjoy Margaret's gift without guilt or apology. That evening, as I sat on the back patio watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica's number, the first time she had contacted me since her brutal hospital room confrontation 3 weeks earlier. "Mom?" Her voice sounded uncertain, almost tentative. "I heard from Pine Valley that you were discharged today. Are you okay? Where are you staying?" "I'm fine, Jessica. I'm in my new home." There was a pause. "Your new home? What do you mean? Did you move into one of those assisted living places we discussed?" "No, I purchased a house. I'm living independently, exactly as I planned." The silence stretched longer this time. "Mom, how could you afford to buy a house? The inheritance from Aunt Margaret couldn't have been that substantial. Are you sure you haven't made a mistake? Maybe someone took advantage of your condition to—" "Jessica," I interrupted quietly, "my condition is excellent. My doctors confirm that I've made a nearly complete recovery, and my judgment is perfectly sound. The inheritance from Margaret was more substantial than you realized, and I'm quite capable of making my own financial decisions." "But Mom, you should have talked to us about such a major decision. Brandon and I could have helped you find something appropriate, something that wouldn't put such a strain on your resources. Where is this house? Is it safe for someone with your medical history?" The condescending tone in her voice, the assumption that I couldn't be trusted to make reasonable choices about my own life, confirmed that nothing had changed in her fundamental attitude toward me. I was still the incompetent burden in her mind, someone whose decisions needed to be managed and whose resources needed to be preserved for her family's benefit. "The house is perfect for my needs, Jessica. It's in a safe neighborhood with excellent medical facilities nearby. I'm very happy with my choice." "Mom, what neighborhood? Maybe Brandon and I could come see it, make sure everything is okay." We've been worried about you since you left the hospital so abruptly. Since I left the hospital so abruptly. As if my departure had been impulsive rather than carefully planned. As if her cruel words hadn't driven me away from any desire to include her in my recovery process. I appreciate your concern, but I'm settling in well on my own. I have everything I need. The frustration in her voice was palpable. Mom, you're being secretive, and that's not like you. We're family. We should be able to discuss these things openly. If you've come into some money, shouldn't we talk about how to manage it responsibly? You've never dealt with significant assets before. There it was again, the assumption that any money I had should be managed with her input, that I was incapable of handling wealth responsibly on my own. She hadn't learned anything from our previous confrontations. She was still the same entitled person who saw me primarily as a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. Jessica, I've been managing money successfully for decades. I raised you, maintained a household, and saved for retirement all on a modest income. I think I can handle my current situation quite well. But this is different, Mom. This is serious money, apparently, and you're not thinking clearly about the implications. What if something happens to you? What if you need long-term care? Shouldn't we be planning for contingencies? What she really meant was, shouldn't we be planning for her inheritance? Shouldn't we be ensuring that she had access to whatever remained after my care expenses? The subtext was so transparent that I almost felt sorry for her inability to disguise her true motivations. I have excellent legal and financial advice, Jessica. Everything is being handled appropriately. The call ended with Jessica's frustrated promise to figure out what's really going on, and her insistence that she and Brandon would be keeping a closer eye on the situation. Her parting words carried an undertone of threat that confirmed she hadn't abandoned her dreams of gaining control over my finances. As I prepared for bed in my beautiful new master bedroom, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just a few months. The stroke that Jessica saw as making me worthless had actually revealed my true worth to myself. Margaret's inheritance had given me the means to live with dignity, but my own strength had given me the courage to demand it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as I settled into my independent life, but tonight I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The peace that comes from living authentically, from making choices based on my own needs and desires rather than someone else's expectations. Jessica still had no idea that her worthless mother was living in the very house she had coveted, the house that could be hers if she could learn to treat me with basic human respect. But I was no longer in any hurry to enlighten her. Let her puzzle over my mysterious new circumstances while I enjoyed the fruits of my sister's generosity and my own hard-won independence. The worthless mother was just getting started. 2 weeks into my new life in Grandview Heights, I had established a peaceful routine that felt like a gift after years of constant worry about Jessica's needs and expectations. My mornings began with coffee on the back patio, watching birds visit the feeders I had installed in the garden. Afternoons were spent reading in the sunroom or tending to the flower beds that the landscaping service had planted according to my preferences. Evenings brought phone calls with Carol Newman, who had become a true friend, and sometimes visits to the community center where I had signed up for a watercolor painting class. For the first time in decades, I was living entirely for myself, making decisions based on my own interests and desires, rather than calculating how every choice might affect someone else. The freedom was intoxicating, and my health continued to improve dramatically. The stress-related symptoms that had plagued me for years, chronic headaches, digestive issues, and insomnia, had virtually disappeared. Dr. Wells had referred me to a counselor who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives after major health events. Margaret Davis, the social worker from Pine Valley, had recommended Dr. Sarah Coleman, a psychologist who understood the complex dynamics of family relationships and elder abuse. Linda, what you're describing is a classic pattern, Dr. Coleman. explained during one of our sessions. Adult children who have been enabled throughout their lives often struggle to see their aging parents as anything more than resources. The stroke, rather than evoking genuine compassion, triggered your daughter's fear that her personal ATM was broken. Her frank assessment stung, but it also validated my growing understanding of Jessica's behavior. I keep wondering if I created this dynamic by always giving her everything she wanted. Maybe if I had set boundaries earlier, taught her to be more self-reliant. Linda, you can't change the past, but you can absolutely change the future. The key is consistency. Whatever boundaries you decide to set with Jessica, you'll need to maintain them even when she pushes back, and she will push back, probably quite dramatically. Dr. Coleman's prediction proved accurate sooner than I had expected. 3 weeks after my move to Grandview Heights, Jessica showed up at my door unannounced, her face flushed with anger and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Mom, we need to talk," she announced before I had even finished opening the door. "I've been doing some research and I know exactly what's going on here." I stepped back to let her inside, curious about what she thought she had discovered. Jessica stormed into my living room, her eyes scanning the elegant furnishings and spacious layout with obvious shock. She had never seen me live anywhere this nice, and her surprise was palpable. "Jesus, Mom, this place must cost a fortune. How much are you paying in rent? Do you have any idea how much money you're wasting on this when you could be living somewhere practical and saving for your future care needs?" "I'm not renting, Jessica. I own this house." She whirled around to face me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You bought this place? With what money? Mom, this is a $500,000 house in the most expensive neighborhood in Riverside. There's no way Aunt Margaret left you enough money to afford something like this." I settled into my favorite armchair, gesturing for her to sit on the sofa across from me. Actually, Margaret's inheritance was quite substantial, more than sufficient to purchase this house and ensure my comfortable retirement. Jessica remained standing, pacing back and forth across my living room like a caged animal. "How substantial? Are we talking about, Mom? Because I've been thinking about this and something doesn't add up. If you had serious money, why didn't you help us with the house in Grandview Heights that we wanted? Why did you let us lose out on that opportunity when you could have easily afforded to help?" The irony of her question was almost too perfect. She was standing in the very house she had wanted, the house I had purchased instead of helping her buy it, and she had no idea. The temptation to reveal the truth was overwhelming, but I held back. Jessica needed to show me something genuine before I considered sharing anything with her. "I chose not to help with that house purchase because I felt your approach was inappropriate. You weren't asking for help. You were demanding it, assuming that I would automatically prioritize your wants over my own needs." Her face reddened further. "My wants? Mom, we're talking about your grandchildren's future. Tyler and Sophie deserve to grow up in a good neighborhood with decent schools. How is that just a want?" "Jessica, Tyler and Sophie are already growing up in a perfectly good neighborhood with decent schools. What you wanted was a status upgrade, and you expected me to sacrifice my own security to provide it for you." She stopped pacing and fixed me with a stare that was equal parts frustrated and calculating. "Okay, fine. Maybe I handled that wrong. But Mom, think about this rationally. You're 72 years old, you just had a stroke, and you're living alone in this enormous house. What happens when you need more care? What happens when you can't maintain this place anymore? Wouldn't it make more sense to live somewhere more appropriate and use this money to secure your long-term care while also helping your family?" There it was again, the assumption that my money should serve her family's needs rather than my own preferences. The suggestion that my choice to live somewhere beautiful was somehow irresponsible, that I should minimize my own comfort to maximize what would eventually flow to her. "Jessica, I'm in excellent health. My doctors are amazed by my recovery, and I'm perfectly capable of maintaining my independence. This house is equipped with everything I need for aging in place. and I have more than enough resources to hire additional help if it becomes necessary. But what about emergencies? What about unexpected medical expenses? Mom, you're being incredibly naive about the costs of healthcare for someone your age. And what about Tyler and Sophie's college funds? What about helping them with opportunities that Brandon and I can't afford on our own? I felt the familiar tug of guilt, the decades-old impulse to prioritize her children's needs over my own well-being. But Dr. Coleman's words echoed in my mind. Consistency in maintaining boundaries, even when Jessica pushed back. Tyler and Sophie have two capable parents who can provide for their education and opportunities. My responsibility is to ensure my own security and happiness in my retirement years. Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. Your happiness? Mom, what about our happiness? What about your grandchildren's happiness? After everything we've done for you, after all the time we've spent dealing with your stroke and your recovery, this is how you repay us? By hoarding money and living in luxury while your own family struggles? The accusation was so backwards, so divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. Jessica, what exactly have you done for me during my stroke and recovery? You visited me in the hospital only when it was convenient. You tried to have me declared incompetent so you could control my finances, and when I refused to sign away my autonomy, you called me worthless and useless. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but her anger quickly overtook any remorse. I was stressed, Mom. I was worried about you, and frustrated because you weren't being reasonable. I said things I didn't mean. Which things didn't? You mean Jessica? When you said I was completely useless? When you said my useful life was over? When you suggested that everyone would be better off if I just accepted that I was a burden? Which of those statements was just stress talking? She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. I was emotional. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional. The important thing is that we're family, and family takes care of each other. You're absolutely right that family should take care of each other, but care goes both ways, Jessica. It means treating each other with respect, considering each other's needs and feelings, and not viewing family members as resources to be exploited. I don't view you as a resource to be exploited, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I view you as my mother, and I think mothers should want to help their children and grandchildren when they can. Help, yes, but not at the expense of their own dignity and autonomy. Jessica, you didn't ask for my help with that house. You demanded it. You didn't express concern for my well-being after my stroke. You immediately tried to take control of my finances. You don't treat me like a beloved mother. You treat me like an obstacle to your financial goals. She sat down heavily on the sofa, her anger deflating into something that looked like defeat. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what you want from me. For the first time in our conversation, she sounded genuinely vulnerable rather than manipulative. I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps we could find our way to an honest discussion about our relationship. I want to be treated with respect, Jessica. I want you to value my thoughts and feelings, not just my ability to solve your problems. I want you to include me in your lives because you enjoy my company, not because you need something from me. But we do enjoy your company, Mom. The kids ask about you all the time. They miss seeing their grandma. Then why haven't they seen their grandma? You know where I live now. You could bring them for a visit, show them my new home, let them spend time with me without any agenda attached to the visit. Jessica looked around the elegant living room again, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. This really is a beautiful house, Mom. The kids would love that backyard, and Tyler would go crazy for that game room I saw when I walked in. There was something different in her tone now, less demanding and more appreciative. I decided to test whether this shift was genuine or just another manipulation tactic. You're welcome to bring them for dinner this weekend if you'd like. I've been wanting to try out the new outdoor kitchen. Her face brightened considerably. Really? You'd want us to visit, even after everything that's happened between us? Jessica, I've never stopped wanting a relationship with you and my grandchildren. But I need that relationship to be based on mutual respect, not on me constantly giving while you constantly take. She nodded earnestly. I understand, Mom. I really do, and I want to try to do better. Maybe we could start over, try to build something healthier between us. Something in her expression gave me pause. The eagerness was too immediate, the transformation too complete. Jessica had shown me who she really was during my most vulnerable moments, and people don't typically change their fundamental character overnight. But I decided to give her a chance to prove that her remorse was genuine. I'd like that, Jessica. But I need you to understand that things will be different going forward. I'm not the same person I was before my stroke. I won't be manipulated or guilted into making decisions that aren't in my best interest. Of course, Mom. I completely understand. I just want us to be a family again. After she left, I called Carol Newman to discuss the conversation. Carol had become my sounding board for navigating the complicated dynamics with Jessica, and her perspective was always valuable. Linda, honey, I hope I'm wrong, but that sounds like someone who just realized they need a different strategy, not someone who's had a genuine change of heart, Carol said after I recounted the visit. The fact that she immediately focused on bringing the kids over, on accessing your beautiful home, suggests she's still thinking about what she can get from you. I thought the same thing, but I want to give her a chance to prove me wrong. Maybe seeing me established and independent will help her understand that I'm not the pushover I used to be. Maybe. But Linda, promise me you'll be careful. Don't let your guard down just because she's saying the right words. Watch her actions over the coming weeks. Does she call just to check on you, or only when she needs something? Does she treat you with genuine respect, or does she revert to her old patterns when she thinks you'll go along with them? Carol's advice proved prescient. Over the next few days, Jessica called twice, both times with requests disguised as concern. The first call was about bringing the children for the promised dinner, but she wanted to extend it to a sleepover so she and Brandon could have a date night. The second call was about Tyler's upcoming birthday party, with subtle hints about how much a generous gift from Grandma would mean to him. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Jessica was still viewing me primarily as a resource, but now she was being more strategic about her approach. Instead of making demands, she was making requests couched as family bonding opportunities. Instead of insulting my judgment, she was complimenting my generosity and wisdom. The test came the following Saturday, when Jessica arrived for the family dinner with Tyler, Sophie, and Brandon in tow. The children were genuinely excited to see me and explore my new home, their enthusiasm warming my heart in ways I had almost forgotten were possible. Tyler marveled at the game room and its pool table, while Sophie was enchanted by the garden and the bird feeders. Grandma Linda, this house is like a palace, Sophie announced while we prepared dinner together. It's so much prettier than our apartment. I'm glad you like it, sweetheart. I've been very happy here. Tyler joined us in the kitchen, his 8-year-old curiosity evident as he examined every appliance and gadget. Grandma, how come you have such a fancy house now? Mom said you came into some money. The innocent question revealed that Jessica had been discussing my financial situation with the children, which concerned me. I inherited some money from my sister, your great-aunt, Margaret. It allowed me to buy a nicer home for my retirement. Cool. Maybe now you can help Mom and Dad buy a house too. They're always talking about how they need a bigger place for us kids. Before I could respond, Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face flushed with embarrassment. Tyler, that's not appropriate dinner conversation. Grandma's money is her business. But the damage was done. Tyler's innocent comment had revealed that Jessica and Brandon were still discussing my finances at home, still viewing my inheritance as a potential solution to their wants rather than respecting my autonomy over my own resources. During dinner, Jessica made several attempts to steer the conversation toward my future plans, my thoughts about legacy, and my feelings about family helping family. Each probe was subtle, but the underlying agenda was unmistakable. She was gathering information, trying to understand the extent of my wealth and identify potential vulnerabilities in my resolve to maintain boundaries. The breaking point came when Sophie spilled grape juice on her shirt, and Jessica took her upstairs to clean up. I followed a few minutes later to check on them and overheard Jessica on her phone in the guest bathroom, speaking in hushed tones to someone I assumed was Brandon. "I'm telling you, this place is worth at least $600,000, maybe more. And she's living here alone like she's some kind of queen. The kids are completely enchanted, which is good. We can use that to our advantage. If she wants a relationship with her grandchildren, she needs to start acting like a real grandmother and thinking about their future, instead of just her own comfort." My heart sank as I realized that nothing had changed. Jessica's apology, her promises to do better, her apparent remorse, all of it had been an act designed to regain access to me and my resources. She was still the same entitled person who saw me as valuable only for what I could provide, who felt justified in manipulating both me and her own children to achieve her financial goals. I retreated to my bedroom and called Robert Stevens, despite the late hour. "Mr. Stevens, I need to accelerate our timeline for the revelation I discussed with you. I think it's time for Jessica to learn exactly what she's been trying so hard to claim." "Are you certain, Mrs. Harper? Once you reveal that you own the house she wanted, there's no going back. The dynamics of your relationship will change permanently." "The dynamics have already changed permanently, Mr. Stevens. Jessica has shown me who she really is, and I've finally accepted it. Now it's time for her to learn who I really am." When Jessica and Sophie returned downstairs, I was waiting in the living room with a manila envelope in my hands. The children were playing in the backyard under Brandon's supervision, giving us privacy for the conversation that was about to unfold. "Jessica, I have something to show you," I said, gesturing for her to sit down. "Something I think you'll find very interesting." She settled onto the sofa with curiosity and anticipation, probably expecting me to show her financial documents that would give her insight into my resources. Instead, I handed her the real estate deed for the house we were sitting in. Her eyes scanned the document, confusion evident on her face as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Then her expression shifted to shock as the implications became clear. "Mom, this says you bought this house 3 weeks before your stroke. But that's impossible. That's when Brandon and I were trying to buy a house in Grandview Heights, and we lost out to a cash buyer who—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale as the full realization hit her. "Yes, Jessica. I was the cash buyer who outbid you. This is the exact house you wanted, the house you begged me to help you purchase. The house you said would change everything for Tyler and Sophie. That would give them the life they deserved." She stared at the deed as if it might transform into something else if she looked at it long enough. "You bought our house. You bought the house we wanted, and then you let us think some stranger had taken it away from us." "I bought a house that I wanted, Jessica. A house that I could afford, and that would provide me with comfort and security in my retirement. The fact that you also wanted it doesn't give you any claim to it." Her shock was rapidly transforming into fury. "But you knew how much we wanted it. You knew how disappointed we were when we lost it. How could you sit there and listen to us complain about the mysterious cash buyer when you were the one who took it from us?" "I didn't take anything from you, Jessica. You never had any right to this house. You couldn't afford it. You couldn't qualify for the mortgage. And you expected me to risk my financial security to help you obtain something that was beyond your means." She stood up abruptly, the deed crumpling in her clenched fist. This is unbelievable. You've been living in our dream house for months while we're stuck in that cramped apartment, and you never said a word. What kind of mother does something like that? The kind of mother whose daughter called her worthless and useless during her stroke recovery. The kind of mother whose daughter tried to have her declared incompetent to steal control of her finances. The kind of mother who finally learned to value herself enough to stop being manipulated and exploited. Jessica's face was now bright, red with rage, and I could see that any pretense of remorse or reformation had completely evaporated. The mask was off again, revealing the same entitled, grasping person who had shown her true colors in my hospital room. So, this is revenge? You're punishing me for being concerned about your welfare after your stroke? This isn't revenge, Jessica. This is self-preservation. And the test results are in. You failed. The silence that followed my words stretched between us like a chasm that had been years in the making. Jessica stood frozen in my living room, the crumpled deed still clutched in her fist, her face cycling through expressions of rage, disbelief, and something that might have been shame if she were capable of genuine self-reflection. A test? She finally whispered, her voice barely audible. You've been testing me this whole time? Not testing, Jessica. Observing. Waiting to see if you could treat me with basic human decency without an ulterior motive. Waiting to see if you could value me as a person rather than as a bank account with a pulse. I remained seated in my chair, maintaining the calm composure that months of therapy and self-discovery had given me. You failed spectacularly. She sank back onto the sofa, the fight seeming to drain out of her as the full implications of her situation became clear. Mom, I don't understand. If you were planning to give us the house anyway, why didn't you just help us buy it in the first place? Why go through all this elaborate charade? Who said anything about giving you the house? The question seemed to genuinely confuse her, as if the possibility that I might keep my own property had never occurred to her. Jessica, this is my home. I bought it for myself, with my own money, to live in during my retirement. Your assumption that it would somehow become yours reveals exactly the problem with our relationship. Brandon's voice drifted in from the backyard where he was, still supervising Tyler and Sophie, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. Jessica glanced toward the sound, and I could see her calculating how to explain this revelation to her husband, how to manage the disappointment of her children who had already started planning their bedrooms in what they assumed would soon be their new home. But the kids love it here, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. You saw how excited they were, how perfectly they fit into this space. Surely that means something to you. Surely you want what's best for your grandchildren. I absolutely want what's best for Tyler and Sophie, which is why I've been so disappointed in their mother's behavior. What's best for children is having parents who model integrity, gratitude, and respect for others. What's best for them is learning that love isn't conditional on what people can provide for you materially. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I had learned to distinguish between genuine emotion and manipulative performance. These tears had the calculated quality of someone who had discovered that their usual tactics weren't working and was trying a different approach. Mom, please. I know I've made mistakes, but we're family. Families forgive each other and move forward. Can't we find a way to work this out? For a moment, I felt the familiar tug of maternal instinct, the desire to comfort my child and make everything right between us. But Dr. Coleman's words echoed in my mind about the importance of consistency, about not allowing temporary emotional appeals to undermine the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. Jessica, forgiveness is possible, but it requires genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a commitment to change. What mistakes do you think you've made? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, clearly scrambling to provide an answer that would satisfy me without admitting to anything too damaging. I've been Impatient during your recovery. I've said things I shouldn't have said when I was stressed about your health and your future. I may have been too focused on practical concerns instead of emotional support. The carefully crafted non-apology confirmed that Jessica still didn't understand the fundamental problem with her behavior. She was admitting to minor tactical errors while completely avoiding responsibility for the cruel, manipulative, and exploitative pattern that had defined our relationship for years. Jessica, 3 months ago you called me worthless and useless while I was recovering from a stroke. You attempted to have me declared legally incompetent so you could control my finances. You brought legal documents to my hospital bed and tried to pressure me into signing away my autonomy. Today, you admitted to your husband on the phone that you plan to use my grandchildren to manipulate me into funding your lifestyle. Those aren't stress responses or communication problems. They're deliberate acts of emotional and financial abuse. She flinched at the word abuse, her defensive instincts kicking in immediately. That's not fair, Mom. I've never abused you. Everything I've done has been out of concern for your welfare and your future care needs. Maybe I haven't always expressed it perfectly, but my intentions have been good. Good intentions don't justify cruel actions, Jessica. And your intentions haven't been good. They've been self-serving. You've been concerned about my welfare only insofar as it affects your access to my resources. The conversation was interrupted by Tyler and Sophie bursting through the back door, their faces flushed with excitement from playing in the garden. They ran to Jessica, chattering about the treehouse possibilities they had discovered and the swimming pool they wanted me to install for their visits. Mom, can we come back next weekend? Sophie asked, climbing onto Jessica's lap with the unconscious trust that only children possess. Grandma Linda said she might teach me how to paint with watercolors. Jessica's face crumpled as she looked at her daughter's innocent enthusiasm, and for the first time, I saw what might have been genuine remorse in her expression. She was beginning to understand that her behavior hadn't just damaged her relationship. With me, it had potentially cost her children their relationship with their grandmother. We'll see, sweetheart, she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. Grandma Linda and I need to talk about some things first. Brandon came inside with a puzzled expression, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Everything okay in here? Jessica, you look upset. Jessica glanced at me, then at the children, clearly struggling with how much to reveal in front of everyone. I decided to make the decision for her. Tyler, Sophie, why don't you go upstairs and pick out some books from the guest room bookshelf? You can each choose 2 to take home with you. The children scampered away eagerly, leaving the adults to continue our difficult conversation. Brandon settled onto the sofa beside Jessica, his concern evident. What's going on? You both look like someone died. Brandon, I said quietly, Jessica has something to tell you about this house. The next 20 minutes were perhaps the most uncomfortable of my life, as Jessica was forced to explain to her husband that the house they were sitting in was the same one they had tried to buy, that her mother had been the mysterious cash buyer who had outbid them, and that despite months of opportunity, she had never mentioned this fact to either him or the children. Brandon's reaction was a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and what appeared to be genuine understanding of the ethical implications of the situation. Unlike Jessica, he seemed to immediately grasp why I might have chosen not to reveal my ownership of the house given their treatment of me. Mrs. Harper, I owe you an apology, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I went along with Jessica's plans to pursue guardianship, and I supported her complaints about your living situation without really understanding the full picture. I should have asked more questions and insisted on treating you with more respect. His genuine contrition stood in stark contrast to Jessica's defensive rationalizations. I began to understand that much of Jessica's behavior might have been driven by her own insecurities and entitlement rather than by Brandon's influence, as I had sometimes assumed. Brandon, I appreciate your honesty. It takes courage to acknowledge when we've been wrong. Jessica shot him a look that was equal parts grateful and resentful, clearly uncomfortable with being the only family member who hadn't offered a genuine apology. The children returned with their selected books, and the atmosphere in the room grew even more strained as everyone tried to maintain normalcy for their sake. As the evening wound down and it became clear that the family would be leaving soon, Jessica made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her plans. "Mom, I know I've handled this badly. I know I've said and done things that hurt you. But is there any way we can move forward from this? Is there any way to rebuild our relationship?" The question hung in the air as I considered my response. Part of me wanted to slam the door on any future relationship, to protect myself from further manipulation and disappointment. But another part of me remembered the little girl who had once called me her best friend, who had hugged me tight after every scraped knee and bad dream. That child was still somewhere inside the woman sitting across from me, buried under years of entitlement and selfishness, but perhaps not completely lost. "Jessica, I'm willing to consider rebuilding our relationship, but it would have to be on completely different terms. No more assumptions about my money or my resources. No more treating me like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. No more using the children as leverage to manipulate my emotions." "What would those new terms look like?" she asked, and I was encouraged that she was asking rather than arguing. "First, you would need to demonstrate genuine change over time, not just apologize when you're caught behaving badly. That means consistent, respectful communication, regular contact that isn't tied to requests for assistance, and inclusion in family activities because you value my presence, not because you want something from me." Jessica nodded, though I could see her struggling with the implications of what I was describing. For someone who had always viewed our relationship transactionally, the idea of interacting with me without an agenda would require fundamental changes in her approach. Second, any financial assistance I might choose to provide in the future would be entirely at my discretion, based on my assessment of genuine need rather than manufactured desire. I will not be guilted, manipulated, or pressured into funding lifestyle upgrades or status purchases. Brandon squeezed Jessica's hand, and I could see him encouraging her to accept these reasonable conditions. His influence on her might ultimately prove more positive than I had previously realized. Third, if you violate these boundaries or revert to your previous patterns of behavior, I will end our relationship permanently. I've lived too many years prioritizing your needs over my own well-being, and I won't return to that dynamic. The finality in my voice seemed to penetrate Jessica's defenses in a way that my previous attempts at boundary setting had not. Perhaps it was the revelation about the house, or perhaps it was seeing me established in my own beautiful home with clear evidence of my independence and resources, but something had shifted in how she perceived me. "I understand, Mom. I accept your conditions. I want to try to be the daughter you deserve, and I want Tyler and Sophie to have the grandmother they deserve." "Then we'll take this slowly, Jessica. One conversation at a time, one visit at a time, one opportunity at a time, for you to show me that you've genuinely changed." 3 months later, I was cautiously optimistic about the progress in our relationship. Jessica had called twice a week without asking for anything, had brought the children for visits focused purely on spending time together, and had even invited me to Tyler's school play without any ulterior motives that I could detect. The real test came when she called one evening with genuine distress in her voice. "Mom, Brandon lost his job today. The company is downsizing and his entire department was eliminated. We have some savings, but not enough to cover our expenses for more than a few months. I'm scared about what this means for our family." I listened to her explanation of their financial situation, waiting for the inevitable request for assistance. But it never came. Instead, Jessica talked about Brandon's job search plans, their budget adjustments, and their preparations for a period of financial uncertainty. She was treating me like a supportive parent rather than like a potential solution to her problems. "Jessica, that sounds incredibly stressful. how can I help you through this difficult time? There was a long pause before she responded. Honestly, Mom, just having you listen and offer emotional support means everything to me. I know you've set boundaries about financial assistance, and I respect that. Brandon and I are adults, and we need to figure this out ourselves. But knowing that you care about us, that we have your love and encouragement, that's what I really need right now. Her response moved me more than any apology or promise could have. She was finally treating me like a beloved family member rather than like a resource to be tapped. She was taking responsibility for her family's situation instead of looking for someone else to fix their problems. Jessica, I'm proud of how you're handling this challenge. It shows real maturity and growth. 6 months later, Brandon had found a new position with better benefits and more security than his previous job. Their financial crisis had become an opportunity for them to reassess their priorities and make more sustainable choices about their lifestyle and spending. Most importantly, it had given Jessica the chance to demonstrate that she could value our relationship even when I wasn't solving her problems. Standing in my kitchen one Sunday morning, preparing brunch for a family gathering that felt genuinely joyful for the first time in years, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. My stroke, which Jessica had initially seen as making me worthless, had actually revealed my true worth to myself and ultimately to her as well. Margaret's inheritance had given me the financial means to live independently, but my own strength and self-respect had given me the emotional means to demand better treatment from those who claimed to love me. The house in Grandview Heights wasn't just my home. It was a symbol of my transformation from a woman who gave everything away to a woman who understood her own value. Tyler and Sophie burst through my front door with their usual enthusiasm, followed by Jessica and Brandon, carrying covered dishes for our meal. The children ran to me with hugs and stories about their week, treating me like the cherished grandmother I had always wanted to be. Jessica kissed my cheek and asked if there was anything she could do to help with preparations, her offer genuine rather than perfunctory. As we gathered around my dining room table, sharing good food and easy conversation, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected gifts that had emerged from one of the most difficult periods of my life. I had nearly lost everything that mattered to me, but in the process, I had found myself. The woman who had once been called worthless by her own daughter was now living a life of dignity, respect, and authentic love. And the daughter who had once seen her mother as nothing more than a resource had learned to value the person behind the generosity. Sometimes the most devastating losses lead to the most precious discoveries. My stroke had taken away my physical strength temporarily, but it had given me something far more valuable in return. The knowledge that I was worthy of love, not for what I could provide, but simply for who I was. Looking around my beautiful home at the faces of my family enjoying our time together, I smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had finally learned to live for herself while still leaving room for others to earn their place in her life. The worthless mother had discovered her true worth, and it was more valuable than any inheritance could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.